Well, welcome everyone to the webinar today. For those of you that are joining live, we welcome you and we invite you to interact with the chat functionality, which you'll see at the bottom, that you can put in your questions and submit it, and we will try to make time both in the course of the presentation, if we get the questions, as well as at the end to try to address them. I want to introduce our topic today. One quick note. It is being recorded, and for those of you that are viewing the recording from the future, we welcome you, and we will be sending this out afterwards. To start this webinar, I want to talk about the success and failure of a practice, which can ultimately hinge on one thing: keeping your schedule full. While the number of patients you can see a day or a week depends on your practice size, resources, or even the industry in which you practice in, the goal of all practices should really be to optimize their schedule to fit in as many patients as possible and according to whatever they can do. So in today's webinar, Working at Full Capacity, How to Keep Patients on Schedule and Stop Drop-Offs, we'll discuss how to limit schedule gaps or dead time caused by appointment no-shows and cancellations. To speak on this topic, we have brought in Paul Goff. A little bit about Paul Goff. Paul Goff is a physical therapist, multi-practice owner, and #1 best-selling author of multiple books, including The New Patients Accelerator Method, The Physical Therapy Hiring Solution, To Sell is Healthy, and The Healthy Habit. Fresh out of PT school, Paul was hired by one of UK's top professional soccer teams, where he worked as head physiotherapist for 4 seasons. At the age of just 26, Paul quit his high-profile job in pro soccer to start his own clinic, known as the Paul Goff Physio Rooms. He also runs a successful podcast, the Physical Therapy Business School Podcast, where he covers hundreds of business questions that are brought up within the business world of physical therapy and other medical practice owners in general. Paul, thank you so much for joining us, and we welcome you here.
Pleasure. No, it really is my pleasure to be here to talk to you today. It's a topic that I absolutely love, and do believe that for any aspiring practice owner, if you can master the ability to keep people on schedule, it's probably the key metric of any company. So it's a great it's a thrill to be here to talk about it with you.
Absolutely. I gave a little bit of a background, but for those of you that are listening that are less familiar with you or your work, give us a quick background on how you got into physical therapy and what led you to starting your own practice.
Yeah, I was a soccer kid at heart and always wanted to be around sport really when I was a teenager. Probably wasn't good enough to be a full-time soccer player, so my alternative was to be around sport via physical therapy. So I pursued that career, obviously got to university, got on eventually into some soccer teams and spent 4 seasons working as a head physical therapist. So it was a dream come true in the end. The problem was I now know myself to be completely unemployable, and I don't like being kind of rigid and told what to do and where to go. So it became obvious that I needed to start my own practice. So I quit and started a business against everybody's advice, my mother's included, to start my own business when I was 26, and best thing I've ever done.
Absolutely. And not only did you start your own business there and starting your own practice, but you've also expanded into the consulting area where you help coach practices across the country and the UK, all over. Can you tell me a little bit on topic? What are some of the biggest challenges you see in regards to scheduling patients, both in your own practice as well
Yeah.
as practices that you're coaching?
I think the biggest challenge for most, and you're right, I consult with people in US, UK, Australia, Canada, pretty much all over the world, and the same challenges present themselves. Doesn't matter what the model or what the system is. I think the biggest for me is staff not following process, and that's the sin, if you like, the cardinal sin of a business owner is it's very easy to blame the front desk guy or the front desk girl, but most of the time they don't have a process that actually works. And if they do, are they even following that process? So I would say the biggest challenge is to get people bought into that. But one of the problems that happens is because the physical therapist is often so busy treating, or the practice owner is so busy treating with the patients, that they don't often see what's going on at the the reception desk, if you like. And I think the other issue, if there's no process, and even if there is, it doesn't get followed. The big one is the time. I think the most important area of any private practice is the front desk. And I've been quoted as saying this multiple times. The most important person, I believe, in a private practice is the front desk guy or gal. If you get that guy, I always call them the quarterback of the practice. Everything flows through them. And if we don't get that area of the business right, and we don't give them the technology, we don't give them the processes, and we don't hire correctly and manage correctly, the business can fall apart from that, from that point. So often when you get a very good practitioner, people naturally want to seek that practitioner out, and they want to go see that person. So what happens is the guy or gal on the front desk gets very busy very quickly. So they don't have the time to do all of the things that are needed in order to keep people on, on schedule. So I would say that the challenge is time in a busy modern day practice, which is where people have got to start looking at more, what technologies out there for helping the guy or the gal who's on the front desk to be the best version of themselves, which ultimately in the end is going to benefit the practice to the tune of more patients and more referrals and ultimately more money in the bank for the practice owner.
Absolutely. And you mentioned process being so important. So when you're talking to other practices about optimizing their process, what are some of those best practices you give in implementing process, and especially in regards to scheduling patients, both new and returning?
Keeping it simple, and it's an easy statement to make, but to keep the process simple and give the guy or the gal a chance to be successful with a very simple process that is using or leveraging some kind of automation, some kind of technology, so that you're not just relying upon them manually, making a phone call or sending an email or trying to reach back to a patient. Giving them access to tools. I always say the business owner's job is to make sure that you hire the right person, that they know what success looks like in their role, but ultimately, and I think this is where it breaks down, that you've got to give that guy or gal access to the right resources. And in my world, the resources might be actually training on how to answer the phone. It could be tools, technology, software, various things like that that makes their job easier. And the other one is the time, to make sure that they've got the time to do that. So implementing implementing a process requires that you've got the right person to do it, and that requires that the right person's ultimately got the right technology, software, and time available to do that job properly.
Absolutely. You need to give them tools to be successful. Otherwise, you're making their job so much harder. One thing you mentioned was having tools or software that would help in the communication process. Can you tell me, what role does pre and post appointment communication play in keeping your schedules full?
I mean, I don't think there's a more important way, or there's a more effective way. Now, look, ultimately, the the physio's got to, or in my world, the PT's got to be likable, and the patient has to like that patient, and they've got to feel successful. With that physical therapist, all of that is the knockout. But underneath that, there are other ways to make sure that people show up. And number one is to simply remind me of the importance of it. Um, I get reminders. If in my world, it's not as common for a physical therapy practice to send out text messages. However, at the dental, practice I've been going to for however many years, they send me text messages every 6 months to remind me to book an appointment. And guess what I do? I book an appointment. And I've argued with this, people in my community, whether it's PT, chiro, I work with some podiatrists, I work with massage therapists, actually one in Salt Lake City. Um, I've argued for a long time that why don't we do this? Why don't physical therapists or healthcare practitioners in general request that their patients come back and self-book appointments and use technology to do that? So if you're wanting to increase the likelihood that I will come back to see you, well, it's simple. Get in touch and ask me to come back. And I think the mindset for most business owners is it's quite passive, that they wait for me to wake up with pain, but the dentist never wait. The dentist is not waiting for me, right? And even I think back to when I was a kid. This the text message and automation and technology wasn't around, but I remember my mum getting a postcard every 6 months, and it would sit in the kitchen, and it would be on the fridge, and it would be a reminder that she needed to book an appointment. And she did book the appointment, and we did go. And to this day, I've got all my teeth, and they're all white. Right? Who knew that actually that process worked to get me to go to the dentist and look after them and keep them clean and me paying free. So when we look at the simplicity of the postcard, you think, well, these days we can automate stuff like that with text messages and emails. Um, and if we can get people rescheduled because of automated technology, and we can remind them 1 hour or 24 hours before their appointment, it makes it less likely that they'll forget to come because they went to the hairdressers, or they got stuck in the coffee shop, or some crisis happened that they ring up and tell us that they forgot because of. And the post the post appointment, keeping in touch, I call it a bridge. Any communication that I can give between the first appointment and the next appointment acts as a bridge to get there. So if I can keep in touch before, I'm more likely to come, and if I can keep in touch after, I'm more likely to come back.
And what kind of things are you often messaging? The pre-appointment is fairly simple because you're just trying to get them to their appointment. And so that tends to be the focus of the message and the call to action. But what kind of things are you starting to put into the message for post-appointments?
Did you have any questions that you didn't get answered? And it can be very simple. 24 hours after my appointment, if I receive a text message that says something like, "Hi, Paul, great to see you yesterday. Wanted to ask, did you get all of your questions answered?" Because they never do. And it's a beautiful question. We do it on the phone as well as email and text, because the patient, when they first arrive, they're not really listening to what you're saying. They're listening, but they're not really taking it in. And so they always have questions. But if you ask the typical patient at the end of their session, if they've got questions, they all say no. So I found that by giving them an opportunity the next day, when they've got some blood back in their face, they're a little bit settled, they're a little bit calmer, they've experienced it, to then go back in and ask, "What questions have you got?" They'll often come back to you and say, "Just remind me again, how many sessions do I need? What did you say my problem was?" They'll ask you questions that you took for granted that they knew. And because they're getting some clarity on that, they're much more likely to stay on your schedule. If they leave the appointment confused, which they mostly do, right? You look at my profession. If you come and have an appointment with me, okay, Ryan comes in for a treatment session. You've got a bad back. The first thing I ask you to do is take your clothes off. I start looking at your back. I ask you to lie down on a bed. I start touching a painful area. You've never met me before, and I've got my hands all over your body. I'm pushing down on an area of your body that already hurts. You're very unlikely to listen to anything that I'm saying. Like, you're more worried about what you think I think you look like.
Very
Like,
true.
oh, this is all going on in
I'm
your
worried
head.
about that right now. And Michael,
Exactly, right? That's exactly what the patients do. And I've argued this for a long time, that the communication in physical therapy and healthcare in general is atrocious, because we don't pay attention to what actually the patient goes through. So when we're asking them to then book 10 sessions, spend $200 a session, we've told them it's sciatica. They're like, "What's that? You touched your L5 nerve. It's causing a hamstring. What's all of these things? I've never heard of any of these things before." It's like sitting in the dental chair for me, right? When he starts talking about this tooth, he's talking to the dental nurse, and she knows exactly what he's talking about. And I'm like, I have no idea what this dude's talking about. I hope he knows what he's talking about. So in my world, the post communication is probably more important. It's all important in the whole step, but to get back in touch with the patient 24 hours after, to ask what questions you've got, to me, is one of the number one ways to keep somebody on a schedule. That first session, the second session, you've got to get them coming back for session 2 and 3. In my world, they don't become a patient until session 3. They have to come 3 times, because at any point up until then, they're susceptible of dropping off. So any communication that ultimately assists them in understanding what I'm doing for them, what the process looks like, what the value is significantly more likely to keep somebody on. And if I keep 2 out of 10 on because of a text message or an email or a phone call, that's tens of thousands of dollars at the end of the year.
absolutely. And obviously, there's going to be patients that are very engaged, that they are proactive, and those ones will interact with you both pre and post appointment. What do you do when you're having patients that just are less engaged, and how do you help try to get them more engaged with you so that they can make it to that third appointment and really become an engaged patient?
I mean, there's a few things. One, and this is a little different than most would think: swap the therapist, because sometimes it just doesn't. That whoever's speaking to them isn't resonating with them, and they obviously don't understand what they're saying. So one of the first things I would do, if we've got a potential drop off, one of the first questions, and this would be, and is something that I teach to my clients, every Monday, you should start every single Monday with not how many times is the phone going to ring, it's who's going to drop off. Every week, every Monday at 9 o'clock, who we're going to lose. Every single one of my businesses, that's the question that gets asked on a Monday. Who's going to drop off this week? And if we know who's going to drop off, we can do something about it. 9 out of 10 times you're right. Your intuition is right about the we didn't connect, we didn't engage, we didn't do whatever. And if we know who that person is, it might be 5 people. And if we've got 5 people, we can set up somebody to call them. We can send some stuff through the mail. We can send them a little text with a little video or some link to something that we want them to watch or see to try and get them more bought into who we are. The magic is in understanding who we are and creating that list, or who they are and creating that list. So start every Monday with not how many phone calls do I need. Make sure you don't lose any. There's no point in adding more if you're going to lose them. So if your focus becomes on just keep what you've got, and then you add 3 or 4, well, you're probably going to grow by a hell of a lot more than you would have done if you focused had just been on growth. So I firmly believe this whole concept, and I've been quoted on it. I've got videos on it on stage. The number one metric that will determine a good healthcare practice from a bad one is, can you keep me on schedule? If you can keep my name on schedule, you've got a chance. And that's the question I often ask. What would your business look like today if you just kept every single name on schedule? Every patient
Absolutely.
you've ever had, you kept them on schedule. Even if it's 12 months, right? Even if it's 12 months out for a review, 18 months out for, they're still on schedule. And then we contact them, we automate some text message or an email, we call them back 24 hours before their appointment. If you keep my name on schedule, however many practice owners are listening to this, if you have that is your guiding North Star in the business, you'll be a very rich business owner.
I love that. And obviously, the goal of most practitioners is having everyone show up to every appointment and never having a cancellation. But cancellations do occur. Cars break down, kids need to be dropped off at daycare. With that knowledge that there is always going to be cancellations, what are your techniques that you help teach people on how do you limit those cancellations, or at least control them?
So you're right. The ones out of control, the kids ill, phone call from school, particularly these days with what, don't even want to mention the name of it. Obviously, we've all been battered by those things, but it was always happening with an illness or some family emergency. So the phrase I would encourage everybody to move towards, and this can save and make you a lot of money, is the patient will ring up and say, I'd like to cancel my appointment. And you will turn around and say, absolutely, we can move that for you. So we're not canceling anything. We're just moving something.
It's shifting.
We're just moving it, which is fine. Because what's the key overall metric of the business that is going to make you the money? Just keep me on schedule. Because what happens, right? And I've been inside of however many hundreds of clinics, and I've managed 30 plus admin staff myself. What happens? This is exactly what they'll say. So Mrs. Smith rings up and says, hey, I need to cancel my appointment. My very well-meaning, very lovely, very nice, very polite secretary will say, absolutely, I'm so sorry to hear about little Johnny. I'll cancel that for you now. Would you like to call back and reschedule when it's convenient? And Mrs. Smith will go, yes, I'll call back and reconvene or rebook that appointment when it's more convenient. When is it ever convenient in somebody's life in 2022? Never. It is never convenient. So the phrase that makes a lot of money is moving the mindset from we'll cancel that to we'll move that, and not giving them a choice not to rebook on the phone. And the simplest way is same time next week, because most people are creatures of habit. And if they're free at 2 o'clock on a Tuesday, they're free at 2 o'clock next Tuesday.
And then obviously after that, you can start them through the whole process again. Send them a text reminder after they change the appointment, and then
everything goes through.
Yeah, I love it. How do you help not lose valuable time when these cancellations do occur?
I think, again, it's back to the Monday morning. The reality is that you are going to get 4 or 5, depending upon how big the practice is. You're probably looking at 2 to 3%, 4% has been a good ratio for moves rather than cancels. So if I've got 100 people on a list, I know I'm getting 4 or 5 people moving, the day before or on the day. So I want my team prepared with a list of names that we could call to get people in very, very quickly. There'll always be people that want appointments at certain times that are waiting for. There'll always be people that when you call them and say, hey, we've got a slot. I've been in business for 15 years as a practice owner. And I know I've got 100 patients. I've got a database of 20,000 plus. I've got 100 patients that if I just called them and said, hello, Mary, listen, I've got a free slot tomorrow. I just wondered if you'd be interested in it. And she'd be like, oh, great. Thanks for calling me. I'll be there tomorrow at 2 o'clock. Now you've called, my neck's a little bit sore. And again, I think physios and healthcare practices, they underestimate how convenient you can make it for people to do business with you just by saying, I've got a slot. Do you want it? Well, Yeah, actually, I do. I'm pleased you called because my life's busy. I'm hectic, and I've been meaning to call you for the last 8 weeks. Thanks for calling me. So having some kind of list of people that you could go to and pre-populate that every day, so that anytime there is a, a free slot that opens up that day, there'll be a hot list of 12, 10, 15, 20 people that you could call who probably make it in.
And when you have that list of people, how are you typically outreaching? Are you usually doing it with a phone call, or do you start with maybe a text message to see if anyone's available? What have you seen in
Either
your
or,
practice?
either or. Again, if I'm trying to get somebody to book their first appointment, if I don't know them, I'd probably send a text. And I wouldn't, have a long hi. My name is Sally from Polgoff Physio Rooms. We're calling today because it would just be very simple. Hi, Becky. This is Paul. Your doctor told me to get in touch. Please give us a call. Something very, very simple. Or even don't give us a call. Tell me a time to call you. The text message is getting read 99%. I'm a marketer at heart, if you like. We're moving everything, every single event, every campaign, everything we do, text messages, because 99% of people, 99% open rate versus 15% and lost in a spam box, as we know, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Our own communication is being or was a little disjointed because of emails arriving in spam boxes, but text messages, boom, 3 seconds later I respond. So I think text message is the key, but I would do both, and I wouldn't say or I'd say and text message and a phone call. I'd call them, I'd leave a voicemail, and then I'd want a text message arriving 30 seconds later just to tell them I've left you a voicemail.
Wonderful. And so you mentioned there are people that are going to be canceling, or in this case, shifting or modifying their schedule. What do you do when there are patients that are modifying their appointment time very often? And how do you follow up with those patients and really
Three.
try to keep them on schedule?
I mean, this won't be a political answer, but 3 strikes and you're out. It's a very simple rule. I'm not really a fan of enforcing the sort of didn't show up fee. I've never understood that. You either charge them the full fee, and that's written into the terms, but it's very difficult to do because the guy or the girl who cancels genuinely believes their reason is valid. So you're about to kick off a whole host of Google bad reviews and various things if you try and charge me the full money. First strike, cool, no worries, please don't do it again. Second strike, cool. Next time you're gonna have to prepay. That's it. And if you continue to mess us around and you don't want to do that, I'll send you to my competitors. I'll give you their phone number cheerfully.
Mhm.
So in
So it's really just
that really is the game, yeah. That if you have a perennial offender, you need to grow a set of balls basically and say this is not acceptable. Like we just don't tolerate this. Where I'm not showing up to see my heart surgeon, right? Like because I respect the heart surgeon, and if you're not showing up to see me 3 times, you don't respect me. There's no point in us doing business together.
absolutely. That's usually a hard thing for some people to say, but it may be a point that you have to value how much is my time worth? And if this person continuously is causing gaps in the schedule that are hard to fill, those gaps are periods of no revenue. And so every time you have those gaps, you're
Yeah,
losing money.
there's a bigger picture to it as well. That when I'm not here to be nice to people, I'm here to fix your health. Right? I can be nice, but we don't have to be nice to each other. You don't want me to be nice to you. You want to be able to sleep tonight, Ryan, without back pain. That's the deal, right? That's the contract. We can be nice to each other and we can be friends, but it's not a prerequisite of your success. So I think sometimes healthcare practitioners need to be reminded that we're not trying to be friends with patients. We're trying to fix their back. We're trying to get them walking again. We're trying to get them to avoid surgery. And being kind is significantly more important than being nice. And kind is I'm not tolerating this. Nice is I will tolerate this and you can treat me as you want. What's the point? There isn't any because you're not going to do any of my exercises. You're not going to do anything I tell you. You may as well go somewhere else.
Mhm. So looping back to keeping the schedule full, we know how important that is. For practices that are newer or just practice in general that are struggling to keep their schedules full, what are some of the first steps and advice you would start giving?
To keep your practice, to keep it full, I mean, first of all, I'd look at who's on your front desk, right? Everything has to go there. It's back to what we said at the start of the call. Who's on your front desk? Have you give them the tools, the bullets, if you like, to fire, right? Do I have a script? Do I know how to deal with it? Have you trained them on move, not cancel? Have they got the technology? Is it easy for them to send text and reminders to limit this thing in the first place. Secondly, if I'm keeping on getting cancels and no-shows, there's definitely a marketing problem. There's a positioning problem. And I'm being allowed to believe, or you're allowing me to believe, that you're just a run-of-the-mill PT without any real authority or expert status. So I'd be looking at, what does my marketing message look like? I'd be looking at what my funnels are, what's the word? My funnels are doing to position how expert I am. I'd be looking at what my guy or girl is on my phone is doing, if you like, with how we're handling those drop-offs and perception. And I'd be looking at what my physios are doing. Like at some point I have to look at that and say, if these guys are good enough, well, people are going to show up. Because I know who isn't getting a cancellation this week: the hairdresser. The hairdresser's not getting a cancellation. Why? You know, they're finding time for that. I say this all the time. People always say, "Oh, well, you know, people are busy," and it's like, well, I'll tell you one thing. You know, my wife Natalie, we've got 3 kids: 2-year-old, a 5-year-old, and an 8-year-old. She never misses an appointment for her hair and nails, ever, 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 ever. She always finds time, and that's because the hairdresser's doing a good job. She knows she's going to get value for money when she goes there.
Wonderful. Well, one of the things I want to circle back and make sure we still have enough time for, we are starting to get some questions in the chat, which we'd like to address. Quick mention, this podcast is being sponsored by Weave, and if you want to request more information, we'll give you Paul Goss information and you can connect with him individually. There is also a request Weave demo button at the top if you want to learn more about how communication technology can help some of these problems. The first question that I'm seeing is, what is the cadence to messaging and how many do you often send pre or post?
If in I mean, I can talk about the specifics, but I'll give you the overarching principle. If in doubt, send more. I don't believe that you can ever send enough communication to a customer, and I'd rather irritate 1 out of 100 than miss out on 80 or 90. If I'm sending text messages, I would be one the day before and one the day of, and it would be we can't wait to see you tomorrow. I would make them very informal. We're looking forward to seeing you tomorrow. Can't wait to see you then. The next day, hey, great news, get excited, it's the day of your appointment. We've got you in for 3 o'clock today. And then 24 hours after.
Follow-up question on that one that was brought in. Do you use fresh templates, or sorry, do you use templates or a fresh message every time you reach out to a patient?
Obviously, if I'm automating, it's difficult to do fresh, you know, to really put something personalized every single time. But I keep it fun, and I would move away from the what's it called, cookie cutter of hello, mister, and just, hey, great to see you yesterday. If you have any questions that you didn't get answered, let us know. Hit reply or use this function in the message. So just keep it fun and energized rather than formal and clinical, which is where most of us default to. So I'm fine with templates, as long as there's a little bit of thought into what I'm actually saying in the text, and don't just say your appointment is, Paul, your appointment is 11 o'clock today. Like, yeah, you had an opportunity to have some fun, have a lovely day, or can't wait to see you. Tell us what coffee you drink. That'll be ready for you. Just something that's just fun and a bit more of who your personality probably really is.
Absolutely. One of the things that I wanted to ask was, you mentioned earlier some of the methods of how you used to be reminded of appointments. You mentioned the postcard that used to be put up on the refrigerator. How have you seen patients evolve in the way that they're interacting with practices, specifically over the phone, maybe versus text message? Are you seeing in your own practices more people texting you?
Text message all day, every day. It's the new method of communication. I say this all the time, right? I mean, you probably might be able to see this, but see my phone? See it's off? So see the button? I haven't had this button on for about 10 years. You will never, ever, ever get me to answer this phone. Never. I'm not answering it. My mother cannot reach me. She has to ring Natalie to get hold of me. But if you text me, you'll get a reply within probably, as long as I'm not engaged in a call or a meeting or whatever it is. But you'll never, ever get me to answer this phone. So you have to text me. And that is, anybody who asks me, how do you want me to contact you? I probably did it to you. You're better off getting me on text. I give you my number. You sent me some text and I replied with seconds. With the email, you run the risk of, this thing getting lost somewhere. I go on holiday for 3 days. I was in Utah last week. I come back to 300 emails. I'm not even contemplating looking at 300 emails. I've got better things to do. But text messages, you're probably getting an immediate response because it's also much faster to do that. So I think anything that pushes text messages and evolves that type of communication, that is where the world is going. We're in text, we're in DMs, we're in Facebook messages. Everything's leading towards digital messaging. So I think for me, text messaging is the future.
Absolutely. One of my favorite comedians mentioned this. He says, the phone has become a seldom used app on my phone, because he's just like you. He uses text message almost exclusively.
It's correct. I honestly could live without the phone function of this thing, but not so much for the the use of the internet and the text message aspect of it, because that's how I'm communicated with all day, every day.
So tell me a little bit about you, in your own practices and when you're consulting with practices, what is the technology that you are advising them to utilize?
I mean, I've had a fantastic relationship with Weave now for a few years, and I the minute I saw what you guys were doing and where it was headed, I felt at the time you were years ahead of where we need to be, right? And that's sometimes a blessing and a curse for a healthcare. You're dealing with healthcare practices, and I am one, so I can see it. We're not always the fastest to move towards the technology, because we think everything's about being the best expert or the best clinician or the best PT, and that's fine, right? But if everybody wants to be the best PT, then something else has to give you the edge. And I think the way that we use, ultimately, what's the number one reason that in the end of it, when somebody looks back and says, I had a great experience, communication, they might not say it, but communication will be one of the things that puts you streets ahead of your competitors. If I can get in touch with you easily, if it feels like you contact me regularly, and I feel as though I'm part of a process where I'm informed, I think you can you're going to get an edge with clients. And that's what I loved about Weave when I saw it, that ultimately you're in the perfect you've got the perfect platform to communicate with people, to help me do what I believe firmly the number one thing that in the end separates a good business from a bad business, and that's the ability to keep someone on schedule. And I've taught that for years. I've been quoted on stage. In fact, the exact phrase I used was Southwest, the airline. They have one thing that is different with them and all of the competitors, and that's the ability to get luggage on and off a plane. That's it. They can get their luggage on and off a plane faster than anybody else. And ultimately, I think the key metric for a healthcare practice is, can you keep a patient on schedule? And if you just focus on that and you use any technology that does that, and that's what I love about Weave, its purpose is really to keep a patient on schedule. And if you can do that, you can make some money as a practitioner. If you can't, you've got no chance.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for the advice. I value your opinion. Not only do you own your own practice, but you're working with practices all across the country against multiple continents, as you mentioned earlier. And so the importance of keeping people on schedule cannot be understated. Thank you for your time. And is there a personal contact information that you'd like to give out if anyone has additional questions they want to follow up with you?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, anybody wants to get anything from me, you can head over Paul G. Send an email straight to me, paul@paulgough.com, paul@paulgough.com. And the best way just to kind of, check out more of this, I speak about this type of thing regularly, the podcast, the Paul Gough Audio Experience, and my books all across Amazon. Five of my books on Amazon. I'm in the middle of number 6 that will be out in October of this year.
Oh, exciting. Do we have a title?
Yeah, it's called Extraordinary Achievement. And it's really about what has to happen to achieve more in a month than most people do in 12 months. So it's kind of little things I've learned over the years about how I ultimately can run businesses all over the world and still take time off and achieve some cool things in my companies.
Well, looking forward to that book. You mentioned October, but we'll keep that out. And for all those that are interested to follow up more with Paul Gough, you can check him out, as he mentioned, to his email or the Paul Gough podcast. You can search online. It should be the first result. Thank you very much for your time. And we like to thank everyone for joining. If obviously you've been listening to this webinar, you are concerned with improving your practice and becoming better, and there's no better place to start than how do you communicate with your patients and keep them on schedule.